What was the first book in homeopathy?
The Organon.
It was the Organon. And the Organon was first, I think the first edition came out in, what, about 1790 something. And the final edition was written but not published in the last year of Hahnemann's life in 1843. So it's a book that went on developing through six different rewrites over a 50-year period. That book, the sixth edition of the Organon, of course, was, some will say suppressed, others will say saved by Melanie Hahnemann, Hahnemann's last wife, second wife and last wife, and was finally given over to William Barricky in about the early 1900s, so not for some 60 years after Hahnemann's death, after the previous edition, and was not published until 1920, the sixth edition. So you can see that between the fifth edition, which came out in the late 1830s, and the sixth edition, which was published in 1920, almost a century passed, or certainly some 80 years passed. So that means that 4 generations of homeopaths grew up on the fifth edition of the Organon and never saw the sixth edition. Many of the new ideas that Hahnemann had in the last year of his life were never confirmed or worked with until after the serious decline of homeopathy, which started in about the year 1910. Or 1908. The Organon was our first book. It marks the beginning of homeopathy, we could say. Now, following the Organon, Hahnemann he stayed busy. He didn't just sit back on his laurels. And he wrote 2 more important books. The first of which was called Chronic Diseases. Sometime in the approximately 1810, Hahnemann became discouraged with the inability to really rid people of chronic diseases. He was doing very good work, very efficacious work with acute epidemics. Cholera epidemics, phenomenal things happened. Cholera was treated by the standard school, and something like 40% of patients went on to die. And in homeopathic hospitals, less than 10% died. And these results were reproduced over and over again in many towns by many different practitioners. So in acute conditions, Hahnemann was having great results. In chronic conditions, he was having spotty results. He would get some cures and some that were not cured. So he tried to reason out what was the cause of this failure, and this is when he came up with his theory of the miasm. And some people will say, but miasm is written in the Organon, not in the first 2 editions. First 2 editions, which were published before the chronic diseases, didn't have anything about miasm. And of course, the 3rd through the 6th edition spoke of the miasms because Hahnemann had already discovered them. Now he wrote then 2 books. Chronic Disease first was a theoretical treatise on how to treat chronic diseases and why miasms occur and how to extirpate them from the patient. And the second part of the book was on what he considered the chronic remedies. Now remember that there were less than 100 remedies at the time of Hahnemann's death. I think he proved 70-some remedies, 72 remedies sticks in my mind, but it may have been a few more. So chronic diseases covers most of those remedies. Now a few of those remedies he didn't consider chronic remedies, and so they're not covered in chronic diseases. Now much of that work was reiterated in his 3rd great work, which was called Materia Medica Pura. 3 main writings of Hahnemann on homeopathy: the Organon, the Chronic Diseases, and Materia Medica Pura. Many people wrote monographs during Hahnemann's life. Very few people wrote books. How could you dare to write a book about homeopathy while the master was still alive? And so very few people did write books at that time period. when to get the computerized systems and what place do they have. I'll say this, that you'll be able to use the computer much more effectively if you get to know the books first. If you get to know the books first, then you know what's there. When it's in the computer, it's really hard to leaf through and get the feel, the general vibration of how the book is put together. Once you get the knowledge of how the book is put together, then the computer becomes very accessible.
Leap to generalities, chapters that describe conditions of the person as a whole. So as you're looking through the repertory for a case, you're going to come across rubrics that you didn't realize were rubrics, but that you know from Materia Medica. And the more familiar you get with Materia Medica, the repertory actually becomes more important to you. The more skillful you are at using the repertory, the better you will be able to actually truly represent your case in the repertory, get a very good distribution of remedies, and from what you know about Materia Medica, know quickly which ones are the very few ones that you want to thoroughly investigate, if you even need to do that. So you're getting to the point again where the more skillful you can become with the repertory, the greater amount of time you're going to save yourself in terms of looking through Materia Medica, because you've come up with only a handful of rubrics that really don't define the remedy for you. I want to go through and give you an idea of the varieties of rubrics, really, that can be found within each chapter, help you find rubrics that you've forgotten, that you didn't know existed. There's another important aspect of knowing the repertory. You know a keynote for a remedy. So someone says to you, a keynote, I perspire everywhere but my head, or I got a cough after I was in a cold, dry wind. If there's a keynote, the point of keynotes is not to jump from a symptom to a remedy. The point of keynotes really is you're looking through your repertorization, a remedy you don't know very well comes up, you should be able to at least think of a few keynotes of the remedy. When you hear perspiration everywhere except the head, or my legs are bursting, hanging down, ameliorates, that's a key to look in the repertory, because in fact almost every keynote except the one I just gave you for Nature Muriaticum, there's a list of 24 other remedies in that rubric, and it could be any one of those. So the place for keynotes isn't to skip walking through the repertory. That's really important. So let's start actually at the back with generalities. So along with the mind section, this is probably the most important section in the repertory. It's the chapter where the patient says, I am cold, I do worse in the winter, rather than my ear hurts. The patient's use of the word I can be very important and revealing and helpful. I had a patient last week who was coming in with a severe, acute, allergic rhinitis. And she described all her symptoms in great detail, and I was in the nose section. In the nose section. And she said, one thing she says, while in the moments when I was being silent, she said, those are good moments to have. You know, the funny thing is, I feel so much better when I lie down. And I looked up. Say more, didn't. And she says, everything goes away, and I feel great when I lie down, and I can sleep. And so I had two choices there, and I was in the nose section, so I looked in there for all the symptoms that I had an idea what remedy I wanted to give her. But this was so important, I really needed to include this. It came out spontaneously, and it was so strong. In every one of the nose symptoms that I'd picked for her, there was a good single remedy that was the one I wanted to give her, which was Nux vomica, but it wasn't in anywhere in the nose section underlying ameliorates. But the way she expressed herself in her language was not, my nose gets better, or actually, my obstruction goes from the right to the left when I lie down. She came out spontaneously that I feel much better when I lie down. And Nux vomica is in generality section underlying ameliorates in a general sense. And the remedy was wonderful. Her bicycling buddy wanted to come to me for her lifetime chronic allergies because her friend was cured so quickly. I told her that probably wouldn't be so easy because it wasn't so acute.